In 9 AD, a coalition of Germanic tribes east of the Rhine revolted against Rome. They were led by Arminius, a former Germanic officer of the Roman army. The coalition defeated the Roman legions led by Publius Quintilius Varus at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. Almost the entire army of 20,000 soldiers was killed. The new emperor Tiberius was out for revenge and sent his nephew Germanicus to retaliate. In 14 AD, Germanicus attacked the Marsi tribe in a surprise attack. 3 other Germanic tribes responded and attacked Germanicus, but were defeated. A year later, the real retaliation came, and what can be described as a war of annihilation. Germanicus and Legatus Caecina Severus, each with 30,000 troops, launched several invasions against the tribes responsible for the Teutoburg disaster. The Cadi and Cherusci were invaded, as were the Marsi for a second time, burning down towns and villages as they went. In 15 AD, Tusnelda, the wife of Arminius, was captured, or rather given to Germanicus by Segestus, her own father. Arminius had besieged Segestus' village, presumably to get his wife back from her father, but he was driven away by Germanicus, and to thank Germanicus he was given Tusnelda, who was pregnant with Arminius' only child. Arminius and his forces attacked Germanicus and encircled the cavalry, but when it seemed like there was going to be a repeat of Teutoburg, the cavalry was reinforced by infantry, and neither side was able to inflict many casualties on the opponent. However, modern researchers found evidence that Arminius may have defeated the encircled cavalry. Regardless, a year later in 16 AD, Germanicus marched deep into Germanic territory, assisted by the Chauci tribe. They managed to force Arminius to fight in an open field at the Battle of Weser River, where the Romans inflicted heavy losses on the Germanic forces and even wounded Arminius himself, but he was able to flee. Arminius retreated and began preparing for a major battle. He built fortifications and lured the Romans to the place where he wanted to fight, but despite this, the Germanic coalition suffered heavy losses and lost. Not that much is known about Arminius after this final battle, but the coalition disbanded, and Arminius kept fighting a guerrilla war with a small force for the next 5 years, until he died in 21 AD, allegedly being poisoned by his own people. Germanicus split his forces in two. One was to march against the Cadi and one against the Marsi for a third and final time. Every construction was destroyed, the earth scorched, and every person they came across killed. The ones that were able to fled to other tribes, and the Marsi tribe was destroyed for good. Rome controlled the land they gained in these campaigns until at least 50 AD, when the Cadi launched a raid into Roman territory, as was written down by Tacitus. But at some point in the 1st century, Rome abandoned the area and made the Rhine and Danube the permanent border. Arminius' campaign against the Romans may have been a failure, but it halted Roman expansion, as it was not seen as worth it, and perhaps it showed the Germanic tribes that Rome was not invincible, and that it was possible to keep resisting. Now, if the expansion of Rome was halted by a coalition of around 30,000 Germanic warriors, imagine if the Suebi Federation joined on the side of Arminius. The Suebi were a federation of multiple Germanic tribes who shared a culture and language. The most widely known of the Suebi around this time were the Longobardi and Marcomanni, but they included many tribes. They later evolved into the Alemanni and Bavari tribes that all southern Germans descend from. Arminius did make an attempt to get the Suebi on his side historically. After the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, Arminius sent the head of Varus to the king of the Marcomanni to forge an alliance. But the Marcomanni, who were traditional enemies of the Cherusci, declined and sent the head of Varus to Rome for burial. The Marcomanni were on friendly terms with Rome at the time, and probably had a good idea of the retaliation that would come Arminius' way. The Suebic, Longobardi and Semnones who followed Maroboduus, the king of the Marcomanni, were seemingly sympathetic towards Arminius and his cause. After the war with Rome, Arminius marched on Maroboduus, whom he accused of hiding in the forest, while the other tribes fought Rome. The Longobardi and Semnones switched sides and joined Arminius in his war. The war was indecisive, but it shows that not all Suebis were against Arminius. Now let's say Arminius or the Longobards and other tribes are able to persuade Maroboduus to join the war against Rome. Arminius commanded a force of 30,000 strong at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. This was likely already a very big part of the fighting age male population of the tribes that took part, as the Marsi and Cadi were completely overwhelmed when they were later attacked by Germanicus and Severus, who each commanded forces of around 30,000 strong. The Marcomanni, who led the Suebi Federation, had an estimated 20,000 men they could call to arms, as did their loyal, long-time ally of the Quadi, who lived in what's now Slovakia. The other Suebic tribes were smaller, but it isn't very clear how small they were. Tacitus describes the Longobardi as being scanty in numbers, so I give the rough estimate of the smaller tribes totaling 40,000 warriors. That's 70,000 extra men in the Germanic coalition. It's becoming clear why Arminius tried so hard to get the Suebians on his side. Arminius never invaded Roman-held territory beyond the Rhine, but rather waited for them to retaliate, probably so the Germanic forces would have an advantage due to the forest terrain. The Suebians historically were less reserved or cautious and preferred to take initiative, as demonstrated by the Marcomannic Wars a century later, when they launched raids into Pannonia and Illyria. King Maroboduus of the Marcomanni was also a stubborn man that wouldn't have blindly accepted Arminius' plans, despite his previous success. Germanicus and Severus still catch the Marsi and Cadi by surprise in 14 AD, but when Germanicus marches deeper into Germanic territory, Arminius attacks him with assistance from the northern Suebi, and outnumbers the Romans 2-1, killing all the encircled cavalry and driving back the infantry. Germanicus retreats, but is harassed by Germanic cavalry while retreating, only making it back with a small number of troops. Severus is called back to reorganize along the Rhine. Meanwhile, Maroboduus launches raids into Noricum and then Pannonia with 40,000 troops, overwhelming the garrison stationed there. After the retreat of the Roman forces, Arminius invades the Chauci and Frisi, who were allies and vassals of Rome respectively. He replaces the treacherous leaders with anti-Roman ones, who vowed to join him in his war. Emperor Tiberius had to desperately defend the borders of the empire, and even Italy itself. The Roman Empire had access to 125,000 legionaries and up to 180,000 auxiliary troops from the allied and conquered tribes. Rome can't leave the border with Parthia completely open, so despite having numeric superiority on paper, Rome can only match the Germans in strength. The Germanic coalition doesn't go beyond the Rhine and the Alps though. Instead, they go on the defensive, trying to hold onto the conquered territory. Public opinion is turning against Tiberius. He is blamed for the failed reconquest of Germania and for the loss of Pannonia and Noricum. As Tiberius gets worried about a possible invasion from the east, he sues for peace, making the Rhine and Alps the new border in the north and Pannonia and Noricum in the northeast. In our timeline, Arminius was assassinated by his own people in 21 AD, likely because he was trying to become a ruler after losing the war he started, which made him less popular. This time, Arminius is massively successful and is voted king of the Teutonic Empire, named in honor of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. He tries to convince the Suebians to unite under him. Maroboduus refuses, but the Suebians who fought directly under Arminius' command join him. Maroboduus invades the tribes that betrayed him, but before he makes it to the enemy, he is ousted from power by his own people. He is exiled and not killed, for the sake of his honor, because he led the army in Pannonia after all. Germania unites into a massive empire. The empire wouldn't be as centralized as Rome. It resembles the early HRE, who were the descendants of these tribes. This makes Arminius the Charlemagne, but without the Frankish succession laws, and about 1,000 years earlier. The first thing Arminius would do is make sure all the tribal chiefs are loyal to him and believe in a united Teutonic Empire. The second thing he would do is finish the dream of a united Germania by annexing the rest of the Germanic tribes. Arminius sends people to all the tribes explaining what has happened and giving them an ultimatum to either join peacefully or be incorporated by force. I don't think the Goths or Vandals would join them, considering their autonomous and nomadic nature. They would likely just move further east. The Germanic tribes further north would feel too distanced from the other Germanic tribes and refuse. But they were not half nomadic like the Goths and Vandals. They were farmers, and like Charlemagne's Saxons, they are conquered. Arminius would try to bring up the level of development in the empire to that of the Romans, copying the alphabet and infrastructure, as well as some ways of administration. The Germans still become Christians. I believe it was inevitable. If you look at the ease in which the tribes were converted, not a single Germanic people stayed pagan, so I think it's fair to say they would be converted in this timeline as well. When the Huns eventually come, it would be a brutal fight, but the Teutons are now well organized and have the Carpathian Mountains, which would have helped. They will survive the Huns like the Romans did, with a lot of casualties but not losing much land. I think the Slavs to the north of the Huns would suffer the most and be depopulated to a large extent, like the eastern branch of the Germans in our timeline. The Slavs that would have become Western Slavs don't exist. The Slavs stay around the area of St. Petersburg and Novgorod for a couple of centuries longer. The Teutons expand eastward into Poland and the Baltic and assimilate the little amount of people that were left behind. If Rome still collapses, the Teutonic Empire would obviously move in. However, with such a powerful empire to the north, I think some funny things may happen, like the development of the Roman Empire being more equally spread out instead of the East becoming dominant. Trade between the two may increase drastically, with the German population exploding and urban centers developing. Rome losing a war they historically won may ironically be the reason they stay at their peak size for much longer.